Hello, dear audience. This is Xiaoli Duan from School of Energy and Environmental Engineering, University of Science and Technology, Beijing. This presentation was prepared together with my colleague Wei Gang Liang from State Key Lab of Environmental Criteria and Risk Assessment in Chinese Research Academy of Environmental Sciences. It's our great pleasure to be invited by Professor Dong Chunxin to this Healthy Air for Healthy School workshop under IndoorAir 2020. The topic today is solid fuel use in China. Why does it matter? First, please allow me to introduce my center. This logo, HIRE, is the abbreviation of Health Improvement by Reducing Exposure. H looks like the elderly person with walking sticks, right? I look like children. R look like pregnant women. E stands for general population. The blue, green, and brown color stands for air, water, soil, and food. As you can see from this logo, that we care about multi-route exposure levels of the general population as well as susceptible population as elderly people, children, and pregnant women. Our goal is to improve their health situation. Our keyword is exposure. It's my great pleasure to be here to communicate with you. Hope in the near future we can have collaborative research together. Thank you. We all know that children's health are affected by total air exposure, which including indoor, outdoor, and in-vehicle exposure to air pollutants. A national representative study in China showed that children spend about 90% of their time indoors daily, especially for children in school ages, which means over 6 years old. In elementary, middle, and high schools, they spend majority of their time indoors. Therefore, indoor air quality in classrooms and households are very important determinants to their health status. Nowadays in China, the classrooms are usually like the picture in left side, which is very clean and very comfort. They use central heating systems in winter. However, in some rural areas in China, they still use coal-burning stoves for space heating in classrooms, sometimes in students' dorms. So, what is solid fuel? Why is it so important? How is the solid fuel use situation in China currently, and what we can do to improve it? That's the three questions I'm going to address today. What is solid fuel? Solid fuels including coal and a biomass like charcoal, wood, crop waste, and dung. Households at lower levels of income and development tends to be at the bottom of energy ladder, using fuels like cheap and locally available but not very clean. So with the increasing of their income, the energy types used by households would be cleaner and more efficient. People in middle-income countries like China tends to use mixture of non-solid fuels and also solid fuels like coal, charcoal, and wood. Since solid fuel like coal and biomass cannot be combusted 100% efficiently indoors, they were just like toxic factory which present or produce particulate matter, CO, SO2, NOx, and lots of VOCs. When people, especially for children and women, exposed to the households with solid fuels, They might cause lots of health problems like pneumonia, low birth weight, stillbirth, COPD, lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, etc. In some places with coals with intrinsic toxic pollutants, the health situations are even worse. Each year, about 2 million people die prematurely from illness attributable to household air pollution from inefficient cooking practices using polluting stoves paired with solid fuels and kerosene. Close to half of deaths due to pneumonia among children under 5 years old are caused by PM inhaled from household air pollution. So how is the solid fuel use currently in China? 5 years ago, under the support by Ministry of Ecology and Environment, we had this national study which called Chinese Environmental Exposure Related Human Activity Pattern Survey in Children. Research subjects are about 75,000 children under 18 years old. Among them, 40,000 are school-aged children over 6 years old. The subjects are recruited from 316 schools in 165 towns in 30 provinces. From this study, we found out that in classrooms and dormitories, about 70% are using central heating in winter. However, there are about 5.8% classrooms still using coal-fired stoves for heating, and there are still 1.4% of dormitories using coal-fired stove heating in winter. This figure looks small, but nationwide, more than 3 million children are affected by solid fuel use in classrooms and dormitories. This is the distribution and comparison of home and school heating approaches. As we can see that even in regions with district central heating, which means very clean in schools, there are still 38.1% of these children were using solid fuels for heating at home. This means that even children exposed to very clean level heating systems, they might exposed to higher level of air pollutants caused by solid fuels when they returned home. Although we all know that solid fuel use for heating or cooking were affected sometimes by the energy available and also the infrastructure. However, the majority reason is their economic status. This is the figure of proportion of schools using different heating approaches at different per capita GDP levels. As we can see that people with lower GDP per capita tends to have higher coal-fired stove heating proportion, which in this figure is in orange box. Well, how polluted is the air in classroom with coal heating? We selected a very typical classroom in Shanxi province with coal burning for heating in classroom and measured PM2.5 and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. We found out that the average concentration of PM2.5 was about 230 nanogram per cubic meter, and for PAH levels, the total PAH was about 90 nanogram per cubic meter. As we can see from this figure that benzoylpyrene level were about 10 nanogram per cubic meter. So both the PM2.5 and benzopyrene exceeded the national air quality or national indoor air quality standards. The pH concentrations in the heating season were about 37 times higher than that in the non-heating season. How is the health effects by household solid fuel use or classroom solid fuel use? Many studies have reported that the use of indoor solid fuels is associated with respiratory diseases, immune system diseases, and even mental diseases. But very few studies focused on height development of children. So, in our national representative study, we explored the association of solid fuel use with the risk of stunting in children living in China. We can see that after adjusting for all the confounding factors, the clean fuel user is about 0.88 centimeter taller than the solid fuel user for cooking and for heating. This value is about 0.76 centimeter. Children who use solid fuels for 34% more at risk of stunting than those who live in households using clean fuels. For heating, this value is 37%. This figure is the differences in children's height and adjusted ORs for stunting according to different types of fuel for cooking and heating. As we can see that for cooking, shorter height and higher stunting risk were observed in children living in households that used both coal and biomass fuels. For heating, children living in households using biomass fuels had shorter height and higher stunting risks. No matter it is for cooking or heating, the effect of biomass is greater than coal. We all know that for children, besides their classrooms, their household situation is also very important for their health status. So, how much households are still using solid fuels for cooking and heating? This was a study carried out 6 years ago. We found out that in China, there was still 45% population using solid fuels for cooking. This figure was much higher in rural areas. However, even in urban areas, there was about 14% population were using solid fuels for cooking. According to the table in right side, that was among several Asian countries. We can see that the use of solid fuels was still common in developing countries such as China, India, Mongolia, Pakistan for cooking. However, the situation in South Korea and Japan was much better. This figure showed the household fuel use patterns for heating in China over the whole country in rural and in urban areas. As we can see that approximately 34% of families have no household heating during the cold season, and about 16.7% of households rely on coal, 12% households rely on biomass, respectively. For household heating, when no central heating was available in rural areas, the biomass proportion was about 19%. The coal use was about 21%. In urban areas, this proportion is smaller than the rural areas. This study adopted an integrated model framework to investigate the trends in the integrated population weight exposure to PM2.5 and associated premature mortality, and particularly the contribution of household fuels to the trends in China during 2005 to 2015. In those 10 years, household air pollution from biomass decreased by 67 microgram per cubic meter as a result of a remarkable decrease in biomass consumption. The IPWE attributed to all household fuels decreased dramatically by 76 microgram per cubic meter during 2005 to 2015, representing as high as 90% of the total IPWE reduction. The cooking decrease rate is higher than the heating decrease rate. This study also found out that if the household fuel use were replaced by clean fuels, the IPWE would be reduced by 63%, which would avoid an additional 0.51 million premature deaths. Besides the effects of household fuel use on the human exposure to pollutants and their health effects, the household solid fuel use is also very important to contribute to the ambient air. This study demonstrated that air quality in Beijing region would substantially benefit from reducing residential sector emission from both within Beijing and within surrounding provinces like Tianjin and Hebei. Compared with controlling emissions just in Beijing, controlling residential emissions in the Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei region resulted in twice as large as reduction in PM2.5 concentrations in Beijing itself. Last, the conclusion and suggestions. People exposed to household or classroom solid fuel use are more direct and more long-term exposure duration with very high exposure levels of air pollutants. Even nowadays in China, there were still large population exposed to solid fuels indoors in both household and classrooms. Especially 3 million children were still affected by solid fuels in classrooms. So we have to say that as an important source of exposure, air pollution related to solid fuels should not be neglected in any environmental health studies or policies, especially in China. Clean energy in schools and households should be promoted, and environmental and health monitoring in schools should also be carried out in China. Last but not least, the refined exposure assessment in both indoors and outdoors should be conducted in the researches. People should care more about the total air exposure in both indoors and outdoors. Controlling solid fuel use indoors is beneficial to health improvement, pollution control, climate change, and environmental justice. So my conclusion is that solid fuel use in China, it does matter. The stakeholders like scientists, policymakers, industries, NGOs, and individuals, we should all join hands together to promote the health situation of children in China and in Asian countries and in worldwide. That's all for my presentation. Thanks for your attention. Should you have any questions, you can email me at jasmine@ustb.edu.cn. Thank you very much.